So hi everyone, thank you for joining and welcome to our third session of TA Talks. It's a series to help job seekers stand out from the crowd, particularly within this market. So I want to thank everybody that's joined us today. So our last event discussed on how to market your LinkedIn profile. So if you missed it, you can watch it on our Woodrow Mercer technology page. Hopefully those tips and advice combined with how to send out your resume should hopefully put you in a great position where you're now interviewing. So today we have some fantastic talent and HR managers from the cybersecurity and software world, and we're going to discuss on how to maximize your chances of landing that job. So majority of employers are now recruiting remotely. Recent surveys have said that the technology industry is just doing 5% of face-to-face interviews. So the landscape is completely changing. So it means that we really need to look at other ways that we can stand out rather than in person. So we have amazing talent HR managers with us, and what we're going to do firstly is just introduce everybody to the audience. They're going to introduce themselves and share their top tip. We're then going to go into a free-flowing discussion where we will discuss what you need to do to prepare, what you actually need to do in the interview, and the follow-up. So let's get started and meet everybody. So let's get started with Lior. Lior, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Eve, for inviting me. So hi, everyone. My name is Lior Tabak. I'm an HR director for Cymulate. We're a global cybersecurity company, 70 employees and growing. I believe that soon we will be more than 80. So if you're asking, one of my main tips for candidates, specifically during this time of many Zoom interviews, is prepare your setup. And by that, I mean, just don't jump on the call the minute that it starts, because the first few minutes this is the first impression. Make sure that you have a clear background, that your camera is working, that you don't have any technical issues or problems. Make sure that you're sitting properly and that everything is really set up for you, because you don't want to start the interview with the wrong impression that everything is like super messy.
Eve, you're muted.
Yeah, we didn't hear you.
Very sorry, and that's my tip. Please don't leave yourself on mute. So sorry about that. And Brandie, next, thanks ever so much for coming.
Yes, thanks.
Your top tip.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you again, Eve, for the invitation. I'm Brandie Reed. I work for a company called ExtraHop. We are out of Seattle, Washington. Personally, I sit in Southeast Michigan. Like Eve mentioned, I'm remote. We're about a 500-person cybersecurity company and growing. We do network detection and response. So we've been in hyper growth for a couple of years and growing very rapidly again, like I mentioned. So we've been doing a lot of recruiting the last couple of years. And my biggest tip for job seekers prior to the interview is to do your research. Anything you can gather online, go to the company's YouTube channel if they have it, scour their website, look for white papers, gather information, construct an org chart on LinkedIn, whatever you need to do to feel fully prepared and ask good, intelligent questions once you finally connect with that company.
Great, thank you, Brandie. And then going on to France, thanks again for joining us.
Hi, everybody. I work out of Berlin in a company called Signavio that's roughly 11 years old at this point, and we have 450 employees scattered across the entire globe. So it's a really interesting job hiring people in the US, in Japan, and in Berlin. Obviously, that's still our headquarters. I guess that one of the advice that I think I haven't given yet is also paddling quite well with Brandie's and Lior's advice is just, if you don't feel ready, reschedule. Just ask to reschedule. Don't take the call in a coffee or from your car, or just, you know, thinking of not turning on the camera because, oh, it's 6 a.m. and I didn't dare telling that person that I'm actually not on the right time zone. You're going to have a bad experience. We're going to have a bad experience. And the fact is that recruiters are used to rescheduling all the time. So we're not going to be too pissed about it, not as much as you might think that we would. So yeah, just don't do it 5 minutes before the interview. Do it 1 hour will be the most respectful. And obviously that's something you can do if you don't feel prepared, because maybe you've looked the company up a little bit more and you've realized that you need more time to look through it. It's okay. Rescheduling is always fine.
Okay, great. Thanks, Franz, for yours. And then last but certainly not least, Ben, thanks again for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. Yeah, my name is Ben Crosby. I'm a senior technical recruiter for Amazon Web Services. I work from the UK London office. We're about just over 1 million employees, a fairly sizable organization. I specifically work for Amazon Web Services Utilities Computing Division, so supporting senior software development engineers and technical hires across mostly Europe. My top tip would be to echo what Brandie already said, and that is research. Go to the company's YouTube page, look into company-specific information on Glassdoor. Quite often you can find breakdowns of how the interviews will pan out, stuff that the recruiters or the HR team might not necessarily want to divulge to you, but you can find it yourself by doing your due diligence. If you are fortunate enough to be given the surnames of the people who will be interviewing you, look them up on LinkedIn, write down specific questions for that person that you want to ask them about their experience. Don't just go in there with some base questions like, what's it like working at ExtraHop, or what's it like working at Signavio? Just ask a specific question about that person's experience. Get them talking about themselves. It's going to build a lot more rapport. So preparation, do your homework.
Thanks so much, Ben. Well, thanks everybody for introducing ourselves. So the first topic is the preparation. So there's already some really good tips there from everybody. I know from my experience that what the information the candidate is given before the interview is probably the most helpful. So if you get the name, you know, if you know the length of the call, in fact, is really quite important. So what should the candidate expect from a recruiter or the employer ahead of the interview?
Are we open foruming now, or are you going to go around?
Yeah, no,
okay.
Open forum. So, anybody who'd like to answer?
You should definitely expect to have a full breakdown of the job description. If you've not already been provided with one, then ask for one. Any competent recruiter, in my opinion, should schedule a preparation call with the candidate to make sure that they know what to expect from the day. What I mean from what to expect for the day is, what's the format of the interview? If it's a technical interview, how's that technical interview going to take place? Will there be a live coding link? Will there be a system design session with the whiteboards required? What will the dress code be? How relaxed will the interviews be? What will the time frames be? Just basically, you want to get a full breakdown of that if you don't already have that. So that is what I would expect from most recruiters: a preparation call, a copy of the job description, and just a full detailed itinerary.
Yeah, I can echo Ben on that. I completely agree that the job description is super important. Many times, at least in our process, so the first interview might be a phone interview with an HR person. So in that case, this would be the first screening, and this is your option or the candidate option to ask everything you might need about the job description and make sure that the job is also right for him. And matches his or her experience, that once he gets to the interview with the direct manager, for example, or a technical interview, we don't just, at that interview find out that it's not a fit, or why are we interviewing this person? I think this is also our responsibility as HR to match the right people, even when it's the first interview. And another tip from me is that you can anticipate sometimes questions that HR might ask you. For example, if you have like holes in your CV, if there are years that you haven't been working in those years, so for sure we're going to ask you about it. So sometimes you can even prepare answers in advance to this kind of question, or don't even wait for us to ask. You can just reply and talk about it as part of your introduction or as part of your story.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think being prepared to talk about anything that's, like you mentioned, obvious on the CV. Expect us to ask you about relocation if you apply for a job outside of your local area, holes in the resume, or a switch in some kind of big switch if you're going in from one area from business unit to a different business unit, or from retail to tech, something like that. We're going to ask. And I also think, kind of to summarize what everybody else was saying too, there are certain things that you can ask your recruiter and that your recruiter is a great resource for. And that would be process, anything specific to that company. And what, like you had mentioned, what the structure of the next interview would be like. There's going to be things that you want to ask the hiring manager about the day-to-day or about specifics, but we are a great resource for maybe company benefits, things that have to do with company culture. If you want to just start breaking the ice with the compensation conversations, we're a great resource for that. How many people are in the pipeline? You'd be probably surprised at how much your recruiter can help you with those kind of questions if you just ask.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think people don't dare enough to really just go in and ask about questions around pipeline, around salary. And that's something I really like, when someone gets in ready with some good questions and just dares to ask, because it makes me feel that they're actually really interested. Another thing I want to add, and I think it's more about like the feeling of having someone else in front of you. So you never know what type of recruiter is going to be in front of you. It can be a super chatty person. It can be someone that's kind of cold, that had a bad day and is just not ready to have that call, because honestly, we are as stressed and sometimes not in it as you are. So sometimes a way to maybe, just simply dare to ask again, like, can you repeat the question? I didn't understand that, instead of straight up saying something wrong, or worse, going into a 10-minute explanation about something that should have been quite simple. Might be, a good way. Just like, be prepared to be in front of a human being that's, supposed to be gentle and take you through the questions, because we're not here to just disqualify you. Actually, we are here to assess whether you have the great expectation about the position that you applied for, first of all, and then make sure that you also match our expectation in terms of potential candidates. So at the end of the day, it's an exchange, and it's good for everybody to feel like they're part of the conversation by asking questions, by just making sure that you're taking it slow if you need, and maybe need to be a little bit more fast if you see that we're getting bored. If you see we're not asking questions in general, it's just because we're listening and letting it go through. So there is some signals as well that are very simple to see, and I think that this is a good way to just overall have a good experience during that call. Yeah, I think that's something I've noticed more recently, doing more and more of those video calls. It's been challenging for some people to just see that it's someone in front, and I think people are not used to that at this point. So go for it, just be yourself a little bit more.
Yeah, adding on to what Fran said, actually, I think an interesting point raised there about feeling like if you're feeling like you're losing an interview, or if you're not 100% sure that you're answering the question correctly, please do, by all means, ask clarifying questions, ask the interviewer, does that answer your question? Am I on the right track here? Or sorry, am I giving you the right information? Or are you looking for something else? Don't be afraid to ask those clarifying questions, because there is nothing worse than sitting in an interview and listening to somebody regaling you with tales of all of their wonderful experience that are completely irrelevant to the question that you actually were asking. And not all interviewers will be strong enough or experienced enough to cut you off mid-sentence and say, sorry, that's not what I was asking, let me just clarify. So if you're not sure that you're giving the right information, do stop and check. Just a couple of company specific things. If you are preparing to interview for Amazon, obviously you have to prepare for the Amazon leadership principles. So make sure that you pull anecdotal pieces of evidence from your career that demonstrate the leadership principles. If it is a technical interview as well, go to LeetCoder, go to LeetChef, practice, practice, practice. Don't just turn up on the day and expect that you're going to be able to solve some of the hardest problems that potentially any interviewers will ask. So make sure that you're prepared technically.
Okay, great. All really, really good advice. And in particular, I liked how France put it, that at the end of the day, the interviewer is a normal human being that just wants to listen, take it in, and have a normal conversation as well. So all really, really great. One thing that I always get from my candidates, and particularly from feedback from clients, is they ramble on. I don't know whether this is nerves or what reason that is, but I always say take a deep breath. Ask if that answers their question, I think is another really great tip that seems to work as well. So, I mean, going on to sort of the next section, I mean, what type of research should a candidate do? What level do you think is satisfactory when going into, let's say, a first stage call?
I mean, the most simple one, obviously, is Googling the company on LinkedIn. Just like making sure that it's the right amount of people. Like if someone is looking for a human-sized company, you don't want to apply for a company with 5,000 plus employees. You want to make sure that you're going to have your spot. If you want to apply for a startup, you're going to be able to see, or not apply for a startup, you will see that quite quickly on a page like LinkedIn. Personally, I like also using that specific tool just to Google a little bit what the people I'm going to get to talk to have been doing in their career, to see a little bit where they're at and kind of assess whether I'd be a good fit for this specific team before I even interview. And I think this is outside of the way of a way to prepare. It's also just a way to get yourself to feel a little bit better in terms of fitting. Because when you're talking with recruiters, most of the time that, in first interviews, if you're talking with a recruiter or with HR, most of the time it's really going to be all about the cultural fit and whether you're going to fit in the team. So those are good things to assess. And then on the long run, obviously, you want to make sure to do a little bit more in-depth research, mostly about the product. And a good way to do that is, again, ask your recruiter for white papers, for documentation, for anything that they can have, because we do have those folders. I have mine in my Google Drive, and it's full of documentation that's waiting there to be sent to candidates whenever they ask.
I completely agree with the fact that it's not only a research about the company, it should also be a research about the product. And today there is so many available resources to learn about that. We even have recorded webinars and presentations, so it doesn't have to be just LinkedIn or a simple Google search. You can even learn a lot about the product just for, going online before the interview.
Yeah, I agree with looking into the product. And I think that sometimes that can be a little confusing because, for example, we do network detection and response. If you're not a technical person, maybe you're applying for something in finance or marketing. it can be a little bit difficult, but there are resources, you could watch YouTube videos anywhere from our marketing collateral to the really technical things that the engineers produce, and just kind of get a good idea. I think, I have a lot of candidate calls where you can tell the difference between somebody that's dug a little bit deeper and someone who's just looked at a splash page and kind of regurgitated what they saw. So I think digging a little bit deeper, looking up the people, as France mentioned, and figuring out if you're a fit, background fit, if, how the organization may be structured, who reports into who and where. Getting an idea of those things can be super beneficial. We mentioned earlier in this talk that you're also interviewing this company. So you want to make sure that you're a good fit too. And you can kind of get a feel for that by digging deeper online.
Great answers. Thank you again. That's interesting because you've all got those materials together, it seems. So one thing that maybe candidates are thinking is, do you voluntarily give out all this information, or do you wait for a candidate to actually ask before you tell them, maybe, or send them some case studies, send them some links to videos?
I personally, I think that it's not my responsibility to do your homework for you. I will point you in the right direction. Certainly during a call with me before interviewing for the company, I'll give you the roadmap that you need, but I'm not going to give you all of the eggs to go in the basket. You're going to have to find those yourself. I think it's echoing what Brandie said. Ultimately, you can tell when a candidate's dug a little deeper. And to also echo what Lior said, there are so many ways for people to go out and ascertain and extract the right information nowadays that it's almost unexcusable for somebody to, particularly if they're interviewing for a startup or something, you have to have at least a high level understanding. If you're not a technical, even if you're not a salesperson who's going to be selling the product, even if you're not a technical person who's going to be implementing it, you need to understand what that company's ethos is. What is their message? What is their go-to-market strategy? Why is their product beneficial to their customers? Because that's going to give your examples from your experience that much more credibility and buy-in. If you can say, I think I'd be good for this job because my experience is relevant to what you're trying to do here, and you can plug the two together, then you're going to make a much more powerful connection than somebody who just comes in and says, this is my experience. Well, why is it applicable? Oh, I don't know. I don't know what your company really do. You really need to understand what the company do. That for me, that goes without saying.
I think that we're learning a lot about the person that we are interviewing, even before the interview, as well as after the interview in the negotiation step. It's not only the 1 hour or more that we are interviewing the person. It's really the entire process when we're learning about him or her. So the process of preparation, or the part of preparation, is really important. And this is what differentiates you from other people that we are interviewing.
Okay, thank you. And then going on to the actual interview part, what do you expect from the candidate? Have you got what tips and etiquette for a virtual interview, whether that's making sure that the camera's on, that the mute's on, in my mistake earlier, what attire should they be using?
That's an interesting question. And I think in the US, it depends on geography a lot in different companies. We're a tech company out of Seattle. That means very casual. There may be, but we may be interviewing somebody who's going to sell into financial services in New York. That may be a little bit more formal. So knowing that is important. But I think as far as setting up the scene, not only just what you wear, but not looking at your phone, and not, we mentioned earlier, not being in the car or being in an awkward position where you're moving around, walking through the house with your phone, things like that.
Yeah, we hire from Berlin. I mean, it's the company was based out of Berlin until 2016, so there is still this core culture of it. And I've had, people working with us that were wearing fishnets, and it's Berlin, so that's the kind of stuff that you can expect. But our CEO does all hands meetings wearing a tank top and flip-flops, so there's really nothing that you need to really pull out when applying for Signavio. But Brandie, you're so right. Every time I hire or I talk to someone in the US, they're fully dressed up with a tie and a blazer, and it makes me feel completely underdressed. And I always mention it, and I always celebrate the effort. But then I also tell them a little bit about that story of the CEO in his tank top and his flip-flop on the all-hand call, because I think it also is important just like to let the people know like you've done something great, but at the same time, it's not necessarily expected of you. I think it's potentially also the recruiter's job to let someone know if they're not doing well on the way they're dressed in the first interview. Like also to advise on a dress code before the interview, maybe after the interview, to just give them an extra chance, because it's a very cultural thing in Europe. You can't really expect anyone to be dressed up for an interview unless it's an extreme corporate type of job. But then again, in the US, it's very much different. It's different everywhere you apply. So I think this advice, you can always check in with the recruiter before you jump in the call, and make sure that you're not under or overdressed before jumping in the first interview. And that's probably the best way if you're confused.
Yeah, I'm not going to answer this as an Amazon specific answer, but if you are interviewing for any company, you should find out what the dress code is going to be. And if your recruiter doesn't come forth with that information, you should certainly have that on your list to ask, because for Amazon, if you are interviewing for Amazon, then honestly, we don't care. I'm not suggesting that you should come crawling out of a swamp and just be a complete state, but honestly, we don't care. Ultimately, we are interested in what you have to say and what you can bring to the company, not what you're wearing. Most of your interviewers will be wearing t-shirts and probably be sat around in their living room with their kids there. I think as well, it's important to understand that everyone's in the same situation right now. We're all at home with our families, working as best as we can. You may well have instances where your interviewer has, toddler come running in. It's just the new, I hate the phrase, but it's the new normal, right? So the reality is, I would say be comfortable first and foremost. As long as you're comfortable, fine. If you want to err on the side of smart casual, fine. But use your head, right? If you're interviewing for a senior sales executive job and it's a customer facing role, then the interviewer probably has an expectation that you're going to be suited and booted. If that's the case, then again, you have to find that out prior to the interview. You can't just turn up wearing whatever you think is appropriate. Find out what's appropriate and dress accordingly. Use your common sense.
So I just want to add that we are an Israeli company, even though we're interviewing mostly for the US. And as you all mentioned, so they're very, very much dressed. But for us, it's completely okay if you wear, sweatshirt or a t-shirt. And we have a very informal culture, a very direct informal culture, I would say. So that's completely fine. But one thing I do want to mention is that if, for example, I interviewed someone who is super intelligent and smart and qualified for the job, and I could even understand, same as Ben said, that his kids interrupted in the middle of the interview, and that's fine. That's our new normal. That's their routine now. Most of the people are working from home. But when he started sitting in a weird way, I would call it, like with legs on the chair, feeling maybe too comfortable, it was, yeah, exactly like that, exactly. But yeah, I think he had shoes, not socks. But it made me feel uncomfortable, I have to say. Like, he didn't pass to the next step, even though he was very super smart. And it wasn't because of the way he said, it was just that I felt it was very disrespectful. You're still in an interview, so sit properly. And not sure whether if I'm like a bit tough on that, but it felt really not respectful.
Possibly, but at the end of the day, you know what a cultural fit is for your company, and if that's not a cultural fit, then that's your prerogative. That's your role is to facilitate whether that person's going to fit or not. So
I guess like if we're all in an informal environment, and I can accept everything, but at least sit properly. I felt like this is the basic in our conversation. Like,
but it would be very normal for a candidate to follow your lead if you were doing that first. But I think if you're sitting very properly and you're talking to them very professionally, and for them to do that, that's where there's a little bit of a disconnect. And I've gotten some feedback from hiring managers that candidates have done that to them, where they were trying to interview them and the candidate, flips their feet up in the air, does something that's not mirroring the same respect. And I also kind of wanted to ask the group, I feel I don't want candidates to dress up for me for an HR screen. I feel like this is, like you mentioned, Lior, this is us figuring out if this is going to be mutually beneficial to get you formally into the interview process. I don't feel the need to be, as Ben said, suited and booted for just me. How did the other HR folks on this call feel about that?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think it's always, again, it's mostly going to be about cultural fits, like us checking whether this person is a good cultural fit or not. And at the end of the day, like, if they're not comfortable, it's something that they, maybe I've had people that were late in interviews, that were uncomfortable, that told me in the middle of the call, like, sorry, I'm feeling a little bit sick. Those are the reasons why you should, if you really feel uncomfortable, either reschedule, either break it down. I mean, it's not you're not being recorded or anything. It's it can be a casual conversation if you know how to turn it that way. So I think it goes also a little bit in that direction, like of just trying to get a contact with the person in front of you, and that's going to be the best way to really just get a good experience and get the recruiter to enjoy the call, which is going to definitely put some points on your side.
To answer your question, Brandie, if I'm speaking company specific, then honestly, we don't have HR interviews at Amazon because every single interview during the process is part of the leadership principles, and that's how we assess cultural fit. So my role is really to understand the candidate's requirements and what level they're going to come in at Amazon, and to set that standard and to help set them up for success, because they're already going to have a 6-hour interview process, 5 hours of which is done on one day, right? So it's enough to expect somebody to endure a 5-hour interview in one day without asking them to do an hour of HR questioning as well. So we're constantly assessing people's cultural fit throughout the on-site day.
Oh, so as a HR professional, do you talk to them over the phone, or is it email prior to the interview?
Video interviews, but I'm very much recruiter specific, not HR. There's no crossover to HR for me.
I see what you're saying.
Okay, that's great. Again, some really, really great tips. The other thing that does also come up is, and I think this completely depends on what role a candidate is recruiting for, but what techniques should a candidate use to answer? Do they specifically need to make sure that they're answering it in the STAR method, situation, task, action and result, or is there another way of them, another sort of, I suppose, technique that you would like to see?
Definitely STAR for me. We advise all candidates interviewing at Amazon to answer any anecdotal pieces of evidence that they're going to provide in STAR. Just to clarify what Eve said, STAR stands for situation, task, action, result. One thing that I would like to add here, which is I see people tripping themselves up on this all the time, is when you are giving the answers to any questions an interviewer is asking you, talk about I and me. Make sure that the interviewer knows what you contributed. Make sure they know what your result was and what you actually put into the project, because they're not interviewing your team, they're not interviewing the company, they're not interviewing the project, they are interviewing you. When you go through the situation and the task, it's absolutely fine to talk about things in the grander scheme. So you can refer to the team, you can say we, you can talk about what the problem was as a team, but once you get to action and result, it's you, all about you.
I cannot agree with you more strongly, Ben. That's huge.
Okay, thanks, Ben. I think you answered the whole question there. So, how should the candidate close? Should they be asking what's the next steps? How forceful should a candidate be in terms of maybe getting feedback on that call?
So actually, I think this is part of our role. And if it's not an HR interview, so maybe we should, explain to the manager or the one that is interviewing to be able to share with the candidate what is the next step. I feel this is our responsibility to put everything in place and in order, and for the candidates to feel safe, that he knows what's going on, he has confidence in the process, and it shows that we know what we're doing. So by the end of the interview, I think we should tell each person what is the next step or when he's gonna hear from us next. So I feel this is our responsibility. And if by any chance, like we didn't share it, it happens. We're people, sometimes we forget or we miss things. So don't be afraid to ask, just ask.
Yeah, I think as you're closing out a phone screen or a phone or Zoom interview, I think it's expected that you ask either some form of a closing, whether what the next step is going to be. During our call, was there anything that gave you hesitation about moving me forward? Is there anything I can clarify for you, or even just taking that time to reiterate your interest? But some sort of closing at the end is, I think, important.
Yeah, and if you forgot to do that, there's always, just the option of sending an email just to say thank you. That's probably, to me, I'm not necessarily expecting people to close, because like, how many times am I late for my next meeting and I have to jump off and kind of cut the person in the middle and just go like, okay, what's your salary? Okay, bye. I mean, no, please don't think I do it that harsh, but eventually it has to happen. So it's always great to get, a quick follow-up and say, hey, thank you so much, or it was great, I like this and that, I'm interested. It can be a short line. It doesn't have to be a 15-pager of why you like the company you applied for. But I think for me, the best type of conclusion is in interview, and by the way, this is expected from you, from every single person you will talk to in the process. So every time you talk to a new person, unless it's a 6-hour interview like the ones that Ben is used to at Amazon, don't send an email every 1 hour when you rotate from one recruiter to another manager. But at the end of each interview, it's expected to send a thank you note. Yeah. And if you don't have the person's direct email, reaching out to them on LinkedIn to say thank you is also okay.
Yeah, I also agree with the sentiment shared, particularly I think on the same page with Brandie on this one. Why it's important to address an issue at the end of an interview and say, is there anything that's given you cause for concern, or do you have any reservations about moving me forward? If you think about it in terms of when you buy a product or when you're looking to buy a product, if you go in there with a misunderstanding about that product, that it doesn't satisfy your needs, you're not going to buy it. But if somebody came over and said, actually, it does do exactly what you're looking for, here it is, but without having the opportunity to get that information and extrapolate that extra little piece that was missing, you wouldn't ever know. You would just pass on buying it. That's what the interviewer is going to do with you if they think that there's something missing, but it's not actually missing. You just didn't get a chance to convey it. So by asking them then and there, hey, what am I missing? If they then tell you, you can then address that then and there and say, well, actually, I do have experience here with this, that, and whatever else was missing. You can nip it in the bud and you could turn a potential no into a yes.
By the way, I think those kind of things can also be added to the thank you note or the follow-up letter. If you forgot to say or mention something in the interview, don't hesitate to put it in the note. Specifically in Israel, it's not really common, by the way, to send a thank you note, but it's a bit formal, I would say, for us, but we completely accept when people from other cultures or other regions send it. And I think you can definitely use it as an opportunity to convey or mention something that you missed or that you want to focus on more and you feel that you missed in the interview maybe, or you want to emphasize. So you can definitely use the thank you note or letter to do those kind of things.
Right, a lot of you have actually answered the next part, which is all about the follow-up. So it sounds as if, you know, majority of the time it is the right thing to do by following up, whether that's sort of email, LinkedIn. How long do you think candidates should wait before, you know, re-following up? So maybe they have said, look, we plan to contact you in 5 working days. If the candidate was to email or call you after that period, is that something you'd expect them to do?
Yeah, I think, I'm sorry, France.
Go ahead.
Okay, I do want to reiterate the part about the thank you note, as you mentioned. I would say here in the US, I didn't realize it was a cultural thing. Here in the US, not all of my hiring managers expect it, but the ones that do, 100% expect it. So I think it's error on the side of caution and always do one. But as far as follow-up, I think, you know, you should be given some kind of outline by your recruiter, but follow up with your recruiter as much as you need to. If it makes you feel better to shoot your recruiter a note in 2 days and 5 days and 7 days, I mean, you'll if your recruiter says, hey, you know, I'm sorry, I haven't gotten any feedback yet, give me a week, then give them a week. But that's your advocate in this process, is your recruiter.
Yeah, a good way to follow up is also asking, you know, you don't only have to ask, when am I supposed to get like feedback from you? Because sometimes it's hard to get in touch with a hiring manager, or they're not giving as explicit of a feedback as we wish. So we don't really have something, you know, really interesting to tell you. So pulling out a couple questions there is maybe going to make us sometimes more likely to answer faster. So if you ask for something like a you know, precise feedback on how you did on a specific interview, we might need a couple of days before we get back to you. If you ask for you know, something around pipeline, just like, I'm assuming you're not the only person who applied, is a good way to go. And sometimes finding out that there is hundreds of people who applied might also imply that the recruiter is quite busy sorting through all of this. And so in terms of duration between several interviews, mostly if it's smaller companies where the hiring processes are shorter sometimes, or just in companies where the hiring processes are shorter, it might be harder to put you in a call, you know, just back to back or once every 2 days, because it's a little bit like a rusty machine. It takes a minute for us to just coordinate and
I'm not sure if we've lost France there, or is it just my computer?
No, she's gone for me as well.
Okay.
It's my internet connection. I'm going to stop.
I think I'll just pick up and wrap up what I think France was saying, and I agree, is that the ultimately the recruiter should be your advocate and should be your champion. Remember that most recruiters, most HR people have a vested interest in getting you through the door, because we want to close the head count. Some people might have reward based stats and KPIs to achieve to get their bonuses and things. Ultimately, it's in the recruiter's best interest to to come back to you with the decision. Now, if you are finding yourself in a position where you're waiting weeks and weeks without getting feedback, then I honestly don't think it's unreasonable to message one of the people who actually interviewed you to ask them what's going on. Maybe there's something going on. Maybe the recruiter's having a particularly hard time. We all drop the ball sometimes. I am guilty of it. I'm sure everybody is guilty of it. But you have to kind of draw a line in the sand. I would say if you've not heard anything for more than 2 weeks, then you're well within your rights to send a follow-up email to the recruiter. And if you don't get a response if you get a response from the recruiter, be satisfied with the response. They're not going to give you misinformation. But if you're not getting anything from the recruiter at all, then by all means, if any of my candidates, if I've ever left you waiting more than 2 weeks and you email my hiring manager asking them what's going on, I forgive you already, because I should have come back to you before then.
Yeah, Ben said it perfectly. We do drop the ball. We get pulled in a lot of directions sometimes. Sometimes one thing's on fire one day and the next thing's on fire another day, and we forget to follow up the way we should. So please don't take it personally. Just email us and remind us to follow up with you.
Sometimes everything's on fire at the same time.
Most of the time.
I can agree there as well. So thanks so much. I want to move on to questions from the candidates now. So the first one, which I think is actually a really interesting one. If you've got mutual LinkedIn connections with the person that you're going to be interviewing with, maybe some of those connections are people that you've worked on a similar project together in the past. Is it worth bringing them up as a potential reference in the interview?
Oh, minefield. Don't name drop unless requested to do so. If the interviewer asks you, I noticed that you have X person in common, what's your relationship there? By all means, but don't just randomly name drop. It's a bit of a humble brag. What I would do, because I'm a huge advocate for networking, and I think everybody should be a huge advocate for networking themselves, especially, is contact that person and say, hey, I noticed that you also know XYZ person. I'm interviewing with that person next week. Would you mind, if it's not too much trouble, contacting them? How close are you to this person? If it turns out that they're really, really close, then that person could put in a reference for you. But I wouldn't just name drop for the sake of it. I personally don't like it.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. You put your finger on it, Ben, and it's also a question of networking. I mean, I have over 3,000 people that I'm in touch with on my LinkedIn. I don't know all of them. So there's a big chance also that I've never met that person, that I've only met them through a random connection, that they added me after an interview 5 years ago, and I might have forgotten about them in the meantime, and I'm sorry about that. So Ben, completely right. Checking in with that person to make sure that they actually know the person you're going to be in touch with is the best way to go about it.
I would say that you can name drop or mention someone only if you're 100% confident about it. For example, if you know that this person knows me or we work together, because you also don't know what our relationship has been. You might have mentioned this person as your advocate and a recommendation, I would say, and then we can find out that we weren't maybe in the best relationship, or this is someone that I don't trust and we work together. So you don't want to just name drop unless you're 100% confident.
I agree. Or if there's some other function behind it, say we have, maybe you're speaking to a hiring manager that's, oversees a channel program and you have mutual contacts at the same partner. That might be a conversation starter, but not just name dropping for the sake of name dropping.
Okay, really good advice, everyone. And actually, I had a situation where I was on the phone to a brand new client, and I did exactly what you've just told everybody not to do: name drop somebody. I don't know why I did it, because I know myself that you shouldn't necessarily do it unless you know that they know the person, and it went wrong. So they said, "Oh, I don't actually know that person. I may have interviewed with them X years ago," and then it's sort of a bit of an awkward silence. You got to quickly move on. So yeah, that's my experience from sort of being on a new business side of it, that, you know, try to avoid that unless you know 100% that they know them and you've got a really good relationship with them. We've got time for just one more question, which I think is actually quite a common one. You know, with Zoom, with Microsoft Teams, you know when the person's in the room. So how early is acceptable to turn up in a virtual interview?
I'd say no more than 5 minutes. In the US, France, you may correct me, I feel like in Germany, they're always 10 minutes early, but in the US, 5 minutes.
Yeah, I use this system where we use Zoom too, but it's integrated with our ATS, and it doesn't allow the candidate to actually access the room, but I will receive a notification on my email. And sometimes I see people like trying to log in 15 minutes in advance, and it's not necessary. Brand is completely right. 5 minutes is more than enough, and that's just the time you need to make sure that your mic on, your video is working. But if you interview with someone like me, you're not going to be able to get into the meeting before either. So there is a little bit of, you know, that other problem where you have to figure out your technical or your IT problems just like without the help of Zoom. But 5 minutes is more than enough.
Well, if you're interviewing for an Israeli company, so no more than 2 minutes. Most chances that we will be there exactly on time or even a minute late. So if you're gonna jump by like 10 minutes before or even 5, most chances we're not gonna be there. So join on time, I would say, or 2 minutes before.
I feel like maybe Amazon is just super chilled about this. Then I honestly don't care. Be there. Ideally, don't be late, but your interviewer might be late. So if you are late, just apologize and carry on with the interview as normal. Again, we're there to assess the content of what you're going to bring to the team and who you are and what you're going to bring culturally and technically to the organization. We're not there to vet your timekeeping skills. Again, for most companies, don't be late, but I honestly, if you turn up 10, 15, 20 minutes, an hour early, that's fine. It's no skin off my nose if you want to spend an hour waiting for me, but I'm certainly not going to be there until bang on time.
Yeah, I would like to clarify that the expectation is not that anybody is early, but if you want to be early to make yourself feel more comfortable, 5 minutes would be the max. I also wanted to mention that sometimes we use our personal Zoom room. And hiring managers sometimes use their personal Zoom room. So you could bump into another candidate if you're too early, which would be awkward for everybody.
Great advice, everyone. We've come to the end of the time now. Just want to thank everyone for joining and everybody's great tips and advice. So this will be available afterwards. So if anybody has missed it, that's not a problem. I'll be able to send out the link, and I'll do that to everybody that's here today. So thank you all again so very much, and I'll look forward to the next event.
Thank you.
Bye.